All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you. Today's program is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is the Interstate Highway System, and it's being presented by the Eisenhower Foundation. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a free series we put on every year from January through April. This is just a quick reminder that by participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them later. We absolutely want you to participate as much as possible today. It makes it a lot more fun for us and for you. If you haven't already, go ahead and locate your chat box. It looks kind of like a little caption bubble. That'll be the primary way we interact today. There's also an option to be on camera. If that is something you would prefer, go ahead and put a message in the chat and I can help you with that. Um, that said, please be really respectful of our interactive tools. So make sure that any questions we have, any comments we're making, that they are directly related to what our presenter is speaking about. All right, and with that, I just want to thank you again for joining. This is our website if you're looking for our upcoming programs, which, as I mentioned, are every Tuesday and Thursday. And also, if you're looking for our recordings, you can find them there. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to who you came to see.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Julie Conley, and I am an educator with the Eisenhower Foundation in Abilene, Kansas. And I'm speaking to you from the Dwight D. Eisenhower Library this morning. And I'm so excited that you are here to learn about the Interstate Highway System with me today. So we're going to be exploring how the Interstate Highway System came to be, its history, how it was constructed, and its impact on the United States. It's really pretty significant. And so I put this quote on our opening slide because it kind of communicates how Dwight Eisenhower felt about the interstate system. Together, the united forces of our communication and transportation systems are dynamic elements in the very name we bear, United States. Without them, we would be a mere alliance of many separate parts. So, as he states in this quote, President Eisenhower believed the interstate highway system really unified our country. Traveling long distances didn't seem so long anymore, and it just seemed to bring us closer together. All right, so let's start our journey today on Interstate I-35 and I-70 at Salina, Kansas, not too far from the boyhood home of Dwight D. Eisenhower in Abilene, Kansas. So in Kansas, the Interstate Highway System gives all those driving on it a good view of the wide open prairies, the seemingly endless blue sky, and also the cities and towns that dot our landscape. So I'm sure that some of you have been driving on the interstate highway just today, maybe to get to school. We drive on them to go shopping or to get wherever our destination is. Traveling on the interstate has become so commonplace now that sometimes we can't imagine commuting significant distances without it. Our economy and our everyday lives have become dependent on the highway systems. And we can give President Dwight Eisenhower much of the credit for putting this system in place. So what exactly does interstate mean anyway? Well, it means to exist between states. Makes sense, right? All of our highways go in between the states. And every state in the US plus Puerto Rico has interstate highways. So there you can see a map of the Dwight D. Eisenhower system of interstate and defense highways covering the United States. All right. One of the 7 wonders of the United States is how the American Society of Civil Engineers has called the interstate system. And there's various list, but among the other seven wonders might be the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, but definitely the interstate system has been quite an accomplishment. All right. So the idea of building highways wasn't new to President Eisenhower. I have a question for you. When did the United States government first consider building a highway system? So I want you to put your answer in the chat. Was it A, 1916, B, 1938, C, 1944, or D, 1956? What are some of your thoughts? When did the United States first think, you know what, maybe we should have an interstate, maybe we should have a highway system? What are some of your answers out there? Have some
We have,
1938s?
yeah, we have a lot of different answers. It looks like a lot of
Yes.
C's, quite a few B's. So 1944 and 1938 seem to be a popular answer. We have
All
a
right. Well, let's find out. When did United States first decide we needed a highway system? 1916. Okay, well, this picture was pretty typical of the roads at that time. He looks like he's having all kinds of fun, right? So roads up until the middle of the 20th century, which had been the 1950s, were unpaved and sometimes impossible to travel after a good rain, as you can see here. So the federal government started giving money to states in 1916 to build roads. But you know, as more and more automobiles were used, there became a greater need for a highway system. So that led to the Federal Highway Act of 1938. Notice the slight change in the wording. They changed the word road to the word highway because, you know, we just needed some faster roads there. And then, as automobile use continued to grow, President Franklin D. Roosevelt recommended building a system of highways. And so the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1944 authorized construction of a national system of highways. However, two world events happened that kept highways from being constructed. Materials and supplies that would ordinarily go to build roads were needed elsewhere. Any guesses what one or maybe both of those world events were? What was happening in 1944? Put your answer in the chat. What might have kept us from building those roads?
We have World War One, World War Two, the crash, the Great Depression.
World War II. In 1944, we were right in the middle of World War II. And so all of those kind of supplies were going there. Right after World War II was the Korean War. So both of those events really kept us from having a highway system. So then Dwight Eisenhower was elected 34th President of the United States in 1953, and he put the interstate highway system as one of his top priorities. Okay, so there were two major influences on President Eisenhower's decision to prioritize construction of the highway system, and both of those influences were events that he had participated in. Those were the 1990 motor transport convoy and his experience with the Autobahn during World War II. So let's take a look at those two things a little more closely. All right, so we have to go all the way back to 1919 to learn about the Transcontinental Army Motor Convoy. This is a map that shows the path of the convoy. They started in Washington, D.C., all the way across the United States, ended in San Francisco, California. The whole point of this convoy was to determine how mobile Army vehicles were in case of a national emergency. So if we had like a military attack on our country, how quickly could our Army mobilize and get to where they needed to be? So remember, we talked before about the conditions of the roads during that time, right? Any guesses about how long it took the convoy to travel from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco? How many days? do you think it took for them to go across the United States with all of their military equipment? Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. How long do you think it might have taken them?
We have quite the range of answers from 5 days, 24 days, 15 days, 3 months, 60 days, 7 days,
All
62.
right. Yeah, well, 5 days, I think, in this day and age, that would be pretty doable. So those of you who are kind of around the 60-day answer, that is right on the money. 62 days, going about 6 to 10 miles per hour. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine traveling for 2 months across the United States going only 6 to 10 miles an hour? Can you imagine traveling a few miles going 6 to 10 miles an hour? That was the speed they were going. So pretty crazy. At that time, Ike was a young lieutenant in the Army, in the Tank Corps. He volunteered to go on the convoy with the Tank Corps. So this picture kind of gives you a little taste of a clue about the success of the convoy. This shows a wreck in Nebraska during the motor transport convoy. After they had finished the convoy, Ike sent this impression of how it went. He says, it seemed that there was a great deal of sentiment for the improving of highways. And from the standpoint of promoting this sentiment, the trip was an undoubted success. So what he was kind of saying there was, if the whole point was that we needed better roads, that definitely proved the point. So I wanted to show you this short video that will give you an idea of what the journey was like, and pay close attention to the types of roads that they traveled on. Oh my goodness. What a trip. So what were some of your impressions? What did you notice? How would you have felt if you were along on that trip? If you were Dwight Eisenhower as a young lieutenant on that trip, what might have been some of your impressions about traveling for 62 days on those kinds of roads? Go ahead and put some of your impressions in the chat. Looks like it was a lot of work for one, right? A lot of digging trucks out of the mud. Part of it was also that the bridges were not built for vehicles. And so some of the bridges, they had to tear parts of it down and then rebuild them. So definitely not a smooth ride at all as they traveled across the United States.
Yeah, we have a lot of those were terrible, frustrated, tired.
Oh, goodness, yes. Can you imagine how tired you would be just digging vehicles out of the dirt and mud, right? But it looks like they also had a little fun along the way, too. It was quite the spectacle as they went through towns. There were celebrations. Of course, people treated them to meals. And so they definitely had that kind of helped along the way. All right. So the second major influence on Dwight Eisenhower was the German Autobahn. So if the convoy showed the absolute worst in automobile travel, the Autobahn showed the best. So the Autobahn is an extensive network of highways across most of Germany. It's about 8,073 miles long, and it links all the major German cities. And so this is a picture, a modern day picture of the Autobahn. It looks a lot like our interstate system, doesn't it? As Supreme Allied Commander during World War II, General Eisenhower experienced firsthand how efficient the German highways were and how easy it was to move men and equipment using the Autobahn. And I imagine that he kind of thought back to that convoy experience and thought, oh goodness, if we had had a highway system like this, how much easier it would have been to travel across the United States. So, with these two influences in mind, President Eisenhower defined specific goals for a national highway system. This is what he wanted the system to accomplish. And the first one was to provide safe roads for travel, right? We saw during the convoy the conditions of the roads of that time. Interstate roads would be 4-lane roads made of concrete, and they would have uniform signs that would be easily recognizable to all drivers. The second goal was that he wanted to provide more direct and efficient routes, prevent traffic jams. So 4-lane highways were designed for high-speed driving, much faster than 6 to 10 miles per hour. And interstates provided direct routes through each state. And then the last one, he wanted to provide a quick and safe way of moving people and the military in case of a national emergency. Definitely something that, since his experiences with the convoy, he thought was very important. All right. So building a great highway system seems like an easy decision, right? But between 1954 and 1956, there were several failed attempts to pass a national highway bill through Congress. And as you can imagine, funding was kind of one of the major issues, how it would be split between the federal government and the states. So there was a lot of debate, a lot of discussion. Finally, President Eisenhower and Congress came to a compromise. Government would pay for 90% of the cost, and the states would pay for 10%. So you would think this was such an important piece of legislation that there would be lots of fanfare and hoopla. Unfortunately not. President Eisenhower signed the Highway Act on June 29th, 1956. He was at Walter Reed Army Hospital during that time, recovering from surgery for stomach issues. So it was kind of a low-key signing. The act called for the interstate highway system to be 41,000 miles long at a cost of $25 billion, was just seemed like an astronomical amount at that time, not so much at this time. All right, so let's take a look at the actual Federal Aid Highway Act document. This is a copy of a primary source, and we can learn some interesting things from reading it. So this document is 3 pages long. Let's take a look at the opening paragraph on page 1 of the Act. All right, kind of gives you the time, the place, the date. And let's read right underneath the Act and see if we can find out, how will money be generated to pay for the interstate highway system? If the government's going to pay 90% of this, where is this money going to come from? And so as we're reading through that, we see that it refers to the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916 that we talked about earlier. Authorizes appropriations for continuing the construction of highways, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1954. It's going to provide additional revenue from the taxes on motor fuel, tires, and trucks and buses. Okay, so I'm kind of curious, why do you think they chose to tax those things? Why didn't they decide to put extra tax on groceries to pay for the interstate highways? Or maybe housing? Why do you think that this was decided on? Fuel, tires, trucks, and buses. And do you agree with this? Do you think this makes sense to you to raise money by taxing those things? What are your thoughts on that? Yes, you think that's a fair way to raise money for this, or no, you don't think so? Do we have any ideas out there? What if they taxed food? Does that have any direct tie to the interstate highway system? Probably
Yeah.
not.
Lots of comments that they used that because it was for people who would be using the roads because it's related to driving.
Hmm.
People agree because then only people who would be using the roads are paying it.
Right, right. Some of the people who kind of were in those discussions were trucking companies, right? Because that would affect them greatly. But they did agree that good highways would definitely be a plus for them. So they were okay with some of the increases in taxes in there for them because just it would be so much more efficient for them to truck their things across country. All right, let's take a look at a section of the second page of the Act. Um, so reading this paragraph will tell us how long Congress thinks that construction of the interstate will take. All right, so kind of there in the middle, where it says it is the intent of the Congress that the interstate system be completed as nearly as practicable over a 13-year period. So they were allowing 13 years to build the interstate system, and that the entire system and all the states be brought to simultaneous completion. So what that means is that all the states' interstate projects would all be finished at the same time. Do you think that would be very feasible? Do you think that's kind of a big goal to reach? The other thing we can find out in this paragraph is that there's actually a long name to this, and there is a shorter name for this act. And that's because this act was passed during the Cold War. And the Cold War was kind of a going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, where we were trying to establish our dominance in military defense. And so they felt it was important to add that be called the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. And then the short name for that is just the Interstate System. So if you see that the National System, Interstate and Defense Highways, that's the official name of this highway system. And then this is our third page where we see all of the signatures required. Dwight Eisenhower's is right down there on the bottom, Speaker of the House of Representatives, and then the acting president of the Senate pro tem all signed it. All right, so once the document was signed by President Eisenhower, the building could begin and the states were off and running. Any guesses? Which state built the first part of the interstate system? What are some of your guesses? There's a lot of competition between the states as far as who got started first.
We have Kansas and New York, Illinois.
Those are some good guesses. All right,
Virginia, Florida,
Virginia,
Vermont, Iowa.
lots, lots of great guesses. All right, well, as I said, there's some competition there. So who was the first? Well, there were a couple of firsts. So an 8-mile section west of Topeka, Kansas, was the first stretch of highway to be completed under the act. However, Missouri claims to have the first project. They started building the new Missouri River Bridge, which would be in the path of the Interstate Highway. So both Kansas and Missouri kind of take bragging rights as being the first to start building. But all the states were very excited to get started with that. Okay, so what exactly does it take to build an interstate? This diagram kind of shows you a cross section of what the interstate looks like. Each lane is 24 feet wide. The surface course is concrete, which is about 9 inches thick. And then there's a subbase, a subgrade, and natural soil under that. You may be very familiar with underpasses and overpasses that are an important feature of the interstate. They allow traffic to move through large cities and other high traffic areas without stopping. Remember, that was kind of an important goal for President Eisenhower. All right, so I have a quick video here to show you. It's the modern process of building new highways. And as you can imagine, technology, whoops, let me go back there. Technology has certainly improved.
We started in the winter with removing all the existing asphalt and the concrete that was here. We will then take equipment and cut the actual grade to the top of the subgrade treatment. That eventually becomes a very solid foundation, much to the effect of concrete. So it provides that strong, sturdy base for all the layers on top of it. And then we'll come behind that with the concrete paver and put concrete pavement down, which is eventually what everyone will drive. We're trying to work in those segments between what I call landmarks, the bridge. So typically we try and get about a mile or so ready at a time. By the time we do the subgrade treatment, then the stub base, the underdrain, the concrete paving, you're talking anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks by the time that process starts and ends.
All right. Well, I don't know if you are like me. Sometimes summers in Kansas seems like endless stretches of road construction going on, but it's an important part to keep our highways safe and efficient for everyone to drive on. So we have to appreciate that hard work that they do. You know, there were some issues and problems, though, that arose during construction of the Interstate Highway System. Not everyone embraced the new system. So let's take a look at maybe what some of those problems and issues were. So, of course, you know, a major one that always comes up is funding. Taxes needed to be increased to pay for the interstate, and no one likes having their taxes increased. Acquiring land was sometimes an issue. Eminent domain is when the government can acquire land if it's needed for the public good. And in this case, citizens are compensated for that, but of course there's an emotional and often a financial toll for that as well. There was displacement of people and businesses. People had to leave their homes and businesses that happened to be in the path of the highways. There was also bypassing of rural and urban areas. So, you know, that provided a kind of an economic impact for small rural towns and areas that used to have traffic that were routed through them. If the interstate bypassed them, they didn't get that traffic through them anymore. And sometimes in larger cities, the interstate divided communities. And unfortunately, this often happened in low-income areas. And there was also some environmental concerns. You know, what was the impact on the environment or on animal habitats? So those were things that definitely needed to be considered as well. However, of course, there were some very positive impacts of the interstate system, and I'm sure that you can probably think of several that affect our lives very positively all the time. So the interstate system was one of the projects that President Eisenhower was most proud of. He had this to say about it: more than any single action by the government since the end of the war, this one would change the face of America. Its impact on the American economy, the jobs it would produce in manufacturing and construction, the rural areas it would open up, was beyond calculation. So let's take a look at some of those positive effects of the interstate system. So as we just saw in that video, it did create new innovations in highway design and construction. It allowed for rapid military movement. The interstate system is the nation's safest highway network. So once the interstate system was built, there was a decrease in fatalities. And if you think back at, how unsafe the roads used to be, the interstate greatly improved safety. And it's definitely given us freedom of mobility. People started taking vacations, started discovering places in our country that they had never seen before. Just being able to get to places they needed to go greatly increased. So it also supports an efficient, flexible, and productive economy. So it kind of connected train freight, freight from ships, freight from airports, and then the trucking industry just grew exponentially because of that. Freight costs have been reduced substantially because of the interstate system. The interstate system has also been called the conveyor belt of our society because virtually every product in your home has traveled the interstate at some point. It has definitely stimulated the development of suburbs. If you think about the growth of suburbs, homes, businesses, malls, hotels, office complexes have all grown. So I'd like to know your opinion. Do you think the good of the interstate outweighs the bad? Why or why not? With every system, with every kind of program implemented, there's going to be some negative aspects, there's going to be some positive aspects, and sometimes we have to sacrifice a little bit for the good of all. So give me some of your thoughts on that. Do you think that the good of the interstate system outweighs some of those bad things? Has it helped our country overall in a more positive way? What are some of your thoughts?
It looks like we have some that say good outweighs the bad. Lakewood said, hard to tell. It really depends on who and how was negatively impacted.
Absolutely. You're right.
Makes it easier for us to travel. Yes, lots of positive responses about the good of the impact.
Right. Yeah, definitely. There were some people that were negatively affected, right? But if you think of the economic potential, the military potential, that kind of thing, I think it definitely has been a very positive thing for our country. All right. So another question for you. So you remember how many years Congress decided it should take to build the interstate system, right? They said it should take 13 years. So I would like to know your opinion. How long do you think it took to actually complete the interstate system under the original act? Was it A, about 10 years, B, 15 years, C, 25 years, or D, 35 years? Notice that 13 isn't any of those answers, right? What do you think? How long did it take?
Lots of vote for 25, a couple for 35.
Okay, all right. Well, good answers. It was about 35 years it took to build the system. The final segment opened October 14th, 1992 through Glenwood Canyon, Colorado. There is a picture of the interstate through Glenwood Canyon, Colorado. Beautiful, beautiful area. All right. So now the interstate system is known as the Eisenhower Interstate System. How did that come to be? Well, in October 1990, President George Bush signed legislation that changed the name of the system to the Dwight D. Eisenhower System of Interstate and Defense Highways. And of course, President Eisenhower had passed away by that time. But in this picture, you will see his son, John, who is second from left, at the unveiling of the sign. And as you notice, there are those 5 stars in a circle. Can anyone guess why the Eisenhower Interstate signs have a circle of 5 stars? It definitely has something to do with Dwight Eisenhower. Think back to his military career.
He's a general, a 5-star general.
Aha, yes, he was a 5-star general, absolutely. So the 5 stars on the interstate sign is a salute to his military ranking as a 5-star general. Good job. All right, so you remember part of keeping our roads safe are the road signs. You know, they serve a very important role and must be obeyed according to law. So let's take a quick look at the history of road signs and how that came to be. So in 1915, the first stop sign appears in Detroit, Michigan. In 1916, we talked about that, the Federal Aid Act that requires a state to have a highway department in order to get that federal money to start working on their roads. 1918, Wisconsin is the first state to erect official route signs as part of its maintenance function. So the route signs saying this is road 10 or this is road 20. 1920, the first 3-color traffic signal is installed in Detroit. 1920s, standards for sign shapes were developed. All right, so we started to kind of standardize what signs should look like. And then the first manual on uniform traffic control devices, which is called MUTCD, was published in 1935 and then updated in 1954 with the use of white letters on the green background for interstate highways. So we're very used to seeing those green signs with the white letters on interstate highways. All right, these are the uniform shapes and colors for signs. White regulatory, yellow warning, green are those guide signs, blue service signs that could direct you to restaurants, that kind of thing. We're all familiar with those orange construction signs, right? And then the brown is recreation. That might show you a lake or a park or campground area. These are kind of special just to the interstate system. The shield is the official sign for interstate highways, and it identifies the number assigned to that highway. And these signs are blue, red, and white, and they're often used with the directional signs and arrows. So another kind of interesting fact is there are certain ways that interstate highways are numbered. Generally, north-south highways, kind of going up and down on the United States, are odd numbered highways, and they increase as you go from the West Coast to the East Coast. East-west highways use even numbers, and they increase from the south moving towards the north. So let's kind of take a look at that. So you see that arrow pointing to Interstate Highway 5 out in California. That is a north-south road, and as our interstate, and as we move further to the east, those numbers increase, and they're all odd numbers. Interstate 5, Interstate 15, we go to 25, 35, 55, 65, 75, 85, and then 95 way up there in Maine. And if you take a look down in Texas, we see Interstate 10, which goes east and west, And as we move north, the interstate numbers increase. So we have Highway 10, which is an even number, right? Interstate 20, Interstate 30, 40, 70, 80, 90. So that's kind of the uniform way of numbering our interstate highways. All right. So how does the use of uniform signage help fulfill President Eisenhower's goals? Definitely, they make roads safer, right? They help direct and provide efficient routes, and they help people and our military move quickly. So uniform signage is very important. No matter where you go in the United States, all of the signs on the interstate are going to be the same as we took a look at before. All right. So we have learned that President Eisenhower's goal to build an interstate highway system helped our country in many ways. The highways provide safe roads. They provide direct and efficient routes for both citizens and the military, and they have promoted economic growth in most areas of the country. So I just kind of like to know, what do you think are some of the most important aspects of the interstate highway system? Or maybe you have some questions that I didn't answer. I would be happy to hear some of your responses or answer any questions that you might have.
We have had a few questions.
Okay.
What impact did the interstate highway system have on minority groups in America?
That's something that, has been up for a lot of debate. And we kind of mentioned earlier that sometimes in those larger cities, the interstates split through urban areas. And it did affect minority populations living in those areas. So yes, that's something that has definitely been talked about and debated. So it wasn't always a positive effect for them.
How do they decide to add interstates or new sections of interstate?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'll kind of throw this out. In the original act that we talked about, there were two states that were not included. And those were Alaska and Hawaii, because, does anybody know the answer to that? They were not states yet. When they became states in 1959, they were added to an amended Highway Act, the Highway Act of 1959, which built those highways. So since it's an interstate highway and it's paid by 90% of it's paid by the federal government, either the government decides we need to add on to the interstate here, or states could say, hey, we would really like to add on to our interstate here. So it needs to be decided though on the federal level, since they're paying for 90% of that.
How were animal habitats protected by the highways?
That's a really good question. And I don't really have an answer to that. Through my reading and research, I haven't really read a lot about that, but that's something that's a great question, and something that probably I'd like to go back and try to, find some more research or information on. I think, anytime you have to clear a large area of land to build the highways, some animals living in that area are going to be affected. So, but yeah, great question. Don't really know how to answer it any more specifically.
Why did Eisenhower support the Federal and Highway Act?
Why did he support it? Well, I think, if we go back to his experience in the convoy, I think he realized we have got to have better roads in the United States. if not for making sure that our military can mobilize quickly, just so the citizens of our country can get to where they need to go safely and quickly as well. So those were some of his main goals there.
Do the U.S. territories have interstate highways?
Puerto Rico does, right?
How were rest stops decided to be built with the highways?
Oh, good question. And I don't have a really good answer for you. That's another one that I am going to go back and research a little closer, because I'm not sure um, how those are funded exactly, how much the states fund them and how much they're funded federally. But that is a great question, and that is something that I could certainly add to our information about the interstate highway systems, because they are all across the United States, aren't they? And provide, I think, a needed place, especially for truckers who need a place to pull over, right, and rest, for anyone. So great question.
All right. Are there intersections along the highway?
Along the interstate highway, so a lot of times there's the off ramps and the on ramps, right? That you kind of have to slow down if you're going to be changing to a different highway. But those overpasses and underpasses generally are there to kind of accommodate those things. Um, as far as I know, there aren't any like stop signs on interstate where the traffic has to come to a complete stop, because the whole purpose of the interstate is that you're able to continually travel. So not that I'm aware of.
We have a couple more questions. Is it okay if we keep going?
Absolutely.
All right. What do they do when military vehicles come through when they're like using the interstate?
Well, that's a great question as well. And here by Abilene, we have Fort Riley Military Base. And so occasionally we see military vehicles up and down I-70. They just travel right along with the rest of the traffic on the interstate.
We have a couple more questions about how were natural resources protected and how was nature protected when they were building the highways, which I think you addressed a little bit. But are
Right,
you aware
yes.
of, yeah, any other specifically for natural resources like oil or coal or anything? Was there any consideration of that?
Not that I'm aware of, but definitely something. I'm loving these great questions where I get to go back and kind of dig a little deeper and find some of those answers.
Were the roads built wide enough for planes to land on?
That's a good question. I think there was kind of a thought that the interstate was built for planes to land on, in case needed for a military operation or for emergency landings, those kinds of things. And in my research, I discovered that that was not one of the original purposes. So as far as is it wide enough? I don't know enough about aeronautics to know the particulars as far as if that would be officially wide enough for planes. I do know that it was not built with that intention in mind. It was built with those three goals that President Eisenhower originally intended.
Is there a weight limit or a size limit for trucks and oversized loads?
I believe that, that's kind of another aspect kind of the trucking industry. And I'm not really sure what the particulars of that are. I know there are like weight stations along the interstate, and definitely trucks can be overweight. But I'm not really sure how that relates to the interstate system. Another great question. You guys have bringing up some great questions that I get to look into some more.
Um, There was a question about why were there so many firsts in Detroit when you were showing like the signs and stuff?
I'm not sure. All I know is, Detroit is supposed to be the motor capital of the world, right? Where they make a lot of vehicles. And so maybe that had something to do with it. Um, that would be a good question to ask someone from Detroit. I think, yeah, I'd kind of like to know myself.
Did any of the governors try to fight this?
I'm not really sure about that. I think in general, the states embraced that because they knew that it would have a very positive impact on their economy. Initially there was some debate going back and forth, like I said, about the funding, how much the states were going to pay and how much the federal government was going to pay. But I think in general, the governors were pretty much in favor of it.
Someone asked, where is the highway number 1? I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Good question. I don't know.
I think
I
it's
haven't.
California, but
Yeah.
good question. I know we've had lots of questions that seem like they would warrant some additional research. Are you okay if people email if I share your contact information?
I would love that. I would love that. I would love to be able to answer some of your questions. So please do. In fact, I do want to bring up my slide here that shows you our contact information. If you do want to find out any more about our programs, you can contact us at eisenhowerfoundation.net, or my email is jconley@eisenhowerfoundation.net. Yes. So yeah, please send me your questions. I would love that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to just take a moment to thank everyone who attended. We really appreciate all your participation. Such great questions today. And Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to share all this wonderful information and all these resources with us. We really
My
appreciate it.
Great. My pleasure. Happy to be here with you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, if you want to reach out, I'm happy to connect you with Julie directly. And we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.